In the bitter cold of winter, when snowflakes fall endlessly and the outside world is covered in a blanket of white, we often find warmth and safety inside our homes. But sometimes, in the quiet of a snowstorm, terrible things wait outside, like ghosts lurking in the darkness. Let's immerse yourself in 3 real scary stories, haunting experiences that happened in a snowstorm, where fear crept into every breath and the cold space became a prison for unsuspecting victims. Sewing. Story 1: Terror amidst the storm. I'm Ethan, a photographer, and last year I took a memorable trip with my wife to the Colorado mountains for an art project. My wife, an avid skier, convinced me to incorporate her hobby into this trip. Before the trip, we were faced with 2 options: either book a room at a luxury ski resort or rent a private chalet, which seemed more romantic. The appeal of privacy, along with cost savings, made me decide to choose a small wooden house, even though it was nothing extravagant. It was just a simple room with 4 small rooms, a bedroom for 2 people, a modest living room, a kitchen and a bathroom. Nothing special, but the idea of being secluded in the warmth of a wooden house in the middle of a snowstorm appealed to me immediately. However, when the storm hit, it jammed the cable signal, leaving us trapped in the house without many options for entertainment. It was starting to get dark outside, but there was still enough light so I was able to shoot some video footage in the snowstorm. I think it will make the background of my project more special. I told my wife I would only go out for a few minutes to film those scenes and quickly prepared my boots and coat. When I walked out the door and closed it, I noticed strange footprints deep in the snow, leading to the main door from under the wooden awning. Those footprints appeared not just once but twice. It was clear that someone had walked to the door and then turned back in the opposite direction. Panic began to creep into my mind, but I tried not to let it take over, not wanting to scare my wife. Curiosity took over, and I decided to follow those mysterious footprints. They led me to the right side of the cabin, where the footprints touched the bedroom window. My heart suddenly pounded, as if everything around me had frozen. I looked out the window and saw my wife sitting on the bed, focusing on the iPad. She recognized me and smiled, then continued with her work. I tried to stay calm and continued to follow the footprints, which led me around the cabin to the opposite side, where they led to the living room window. A shiver ran down my spine when I realized someone had been watching us from outside. But how long have they been there? That question swirled in my head. I stood there for a moment, struggling with the idea of whether I should continue or not. In the end, curiosity won again. I continued to follow the footsteps out of the cabin, knowing I was heading in the direction this person must have come from. My footprints led me out of the safety of the cabin and deeper into the dense forest. Coming to a clearing, I saw a man wearing a black coat, standing facing a tree. He bowed his head, staring at the ground, not moving, not making a sound, as if frozen in the middle of a snowstorm. Snow had covered his hood and shoulders, creating a haunting, unforgettable image. I stood still, trying not to make any noise, my heart racing. In that moment, I wanted to ask him if he needed help, but for some reason, my words got stuck in my throat. The man did not move, showed no signs of life, like a statue forgotten in the middle of a storm. The fear made me decide to step back step by step, trying not to turn my back or take my eyes off him, fearing that if I did, he would suddenly come back. When I felt safe enough, I turned around and ran quickly back to the cabin, leaving my footprints in the snow. As I slammed the door, my wife came running, looking worried. I knew that she realized something was wrong. After several tense minutes, I finally told her what I had seen. Immediately, my wife started packing her things, determined to leave immediately. But I, haunted by the thought of losing money by leaving early and not wanting to surrender to a stranger, objected. I didn't want to leave just because some stranger wandered outside the cabin. My wife, although not agreeing with my decision, finally locked both locks on the door and thoroughly checked all the windows, making sure they were tightly closed. We try to relax by reading books on the iPad and reviewing the photos and videos I've taken. But that night, nothing could make us forget the presence of that mysterious man. When it was late at night and we turned off the lights, the howling wind outside and the sound of snow hitting the windows created a strange feeling, both relaxing and creepy. I knew I could quickly fall asleep if it wasn't for the terrible sound. The sound of tapping on the bedroom window echoed in the dark night, clearly the sound of a person, not of nature. We were both alert and understood that this could not be a coincidence. I immediately pulled my wife out of bed and led her into the living room without turning on the lights and without any weapons to defend herself. Our only choice is to run before something bad happens. I told my wife to forget our luggage and quickly rushed out. We put on our boots in the dark, not daring to hesitate, and as soon as we heard a knock on the living room window on the other side, we knew there was no time to hesitate. We ran to my Jeep, hearts pounding in our chests.
Reaching out to press the remote unlock button, I felt an incomparable sense of relief as the car unlocked. We quickly got into the car and started the engine. The headlights shined, and I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw that man, still standing there, facing the wooden house, but this time not at the window, but just facing the cold wooden wall, right where I had seen him before. It was as if he was trying to hide his face from us.
We drove out of there, through the snow-covered road, towards the nearest ski resort without much trouble thanks to the powerful Jeep. That night, we stayed at the resort, not daring to think about going back to the cabin. But the next morning, we were forced to go back to get the things we left behind. When we arrived, the man had disappeared, but that creepy feeling remained, forever haunting my mind. Story 2: Scary Night in the Falling Snow. It was a cold December night when the blizzard began to fall, covering everything in a thick layer of white and stillness. I was home alone, having just had my first experience trying to smoke marijuana, something I'd heard was refreshing. The house was quiet, only the sound of the wind whistling outside and the sound of snow pattering on the windows. I was lying in bed, trying to breathe in without coughing, as if I was doing something secret, a silent action but full of expectation. Time passed slowly. Each breath of smoke gradually crept into my lungs, bringing with it a new but also vague and difficult to grasp feeling. The room around me seemed to sink into a quieter space. Everything seemed to slow down, and I felt myself starting to notice sounds that I hadn't noticed before. Outside the window, snow was still falling, thick and white, covering the night sky. Just as I started to feel like things were getting strange, the silence was broken by a gentle but constant noise from downstairs. There was a knock on the front door, a sound like someone gently, timidly wanting to attract attention. A feeling of anxiety began to rise in my heart, even though I knew that neither my parents nor my sister were home tonight. I walked down the stairs, as stealthy as a ghost, trying not to make a sound as I looked through the peephole. Standing on the porch was a strange man, with a dirty look and torn clothes, almost homeless. His face was hidden by a worn gray beanie, revealing only dark eyes. It was a scene that I never thought I would face in this place, a house isolated from faraway neighbors, where the wind whistled through tree branches and snowflakes flew in the air like ghosts. Lost soul. I quickly turned around and climbed up to my room with my heart pounding, not daring to face that man. Closing the door tightly, I told myself that it was just a coincidence, that he couldn't do anything to me. But the quiet in the house suddenly became oppressive. The small noises around seemed to be amplified. Every little cry from the wooden panels seemed to echo in my head, plunging me into a wave of anxiety and depression. Paranoid. As I tried to go back to bed, trying to take my mind off the image of that man, a loud noise suddenly rang out from my window. The sound was as if a rock had just hit the glass, startling me awake from my reverie. I immediately turned off the TV. The room was plunged into absolute darkness, leaving only terrifying silence. A moment passed like an eternity as I tried to reassure myself that everything was just due to the effects of marijuana, that everything was happening in my head. But then, in that thick darkness, I noticed something unusual in the corner of the room. Something dark is lurking behind my partially open door. My heart stopped beating when I realized a pair of cold eyes were staring at me, full of obsession and cruelty. In an instant, a feeling of terror filled my body as the man stepped out of the darkness, walking towards my bed. My body froze. I couldn't move. I could only watch him come closer, step by step, like a nightmare coming true. He muttered something, his voice broken, as if he was pleading for something I couldn't understand. In a panic, I had no choice but to use all my remaining strength to push him to the floor. He was thin and weak, and I easily dragged him out of the room. With every step I took, I felt the weakness, almost madness, in his eyes. When I closed the door and locked it, my heart was still racing, but I knew I was safe. When the police arrived, they found him curled up in the bushes in front of the house, like a lost shadow, no longer a threat to me. But the image of him, that crazy look, will forever be etched in my mind, making that night one of the scariest memories I have ever experienced. Story 3: Nightmare in Manhunt Game. It was a cold winter night in January when a fierce snowstorm covered everything, turning the surrounding world into a white, hazy scene under the cold moonlight. We, a group of 6 13-year-olds, decided to continue our tradition of playing Manhunt no matter how harsh the weather. This game, like regular tag, has the added fun of having to escape to a safe spot, which is the front porch of the house. In summer, this game is already very interesting, but winter, with its thick layer of snow, brings a different feeling of mystery and horror. The snow fell heavily, covering all traces and slowing down the pursuer's footsteps, creating a tense atmosphere like in a real hunt. Footsteps weighed heavily on the snow, leaving faint traces, like the sign of a fugitive chased by an invisible enemy. We also used snowballs as weapons, throwing them at each other to slow down our pursuers. But that night, in the fury of a blizzard, a child's game turned into a real nightmare, a memory we will never forget. Me, Dan, and Christian were teammates. Together we hid from the pursuer's sight. Dan jumped over the fence, disappearing into the backyard of a house on the other side of the block. Christian, with his agility, jumped onto the roof of another friend's barn, hiding behind the slope like a stray cat in the dark. And I, thinking I would be smarter, started running around the backyard, trying to create an intricate network of footprints as a distraction. When shouts rang out from the other side of the house, signaling that the pursuer was approaching, I knew I needed to think quickly. I signaled Christian, telling him to run to the roof, while I quickly jumped into the bushes, and lay flat under the thick layer of snow. My heart skipped a beat when the two pursuing friends entered the backyard, began analyzing the path of footprints I had created, step by step getting closer to my hiding place. All the sounds around me became more vivid. Each step on the snow sounded like thunder in my head. Christian, realizing the danger, jumped off the roof, ran out into the cold snow and ran toward the front lawn. The two pursuers immediately took their eyes off my hiding place and split up to chase after Christian. In that moment, I knew I needed to take advantage of the opportunity to escape. I quickly climbed onto the barn roof, as Dan had done before, and jumped over the fence to the backyard of the house on the other side of the block. But when I set foot in the snow and looked around, a cold feeling spread throughout my body. Dan was nowhere to be seen. His footprints seemed to disappear into the cold air. I tried looking, but only saw a few shoe prints next to the fence, where Dan might have landed. However, those tracks quickly turned into a long trail, as if something had been dragged through the snow. I followed that trail to the back door of a dark house. No light, no signs of life. An uneasy feeling spread through me as I stood in front of that door, every sense warning that something was wrong. I turned around, intending to return to the fence, but just halfway across the yard, I heard the door slide open. A dark figure wearing a thick coat, with a hat covering his face, walked out of the house. That person's heavy footsteps pressed against the snow, step by step moving towards me like a nightmare materializing. Panic struck. I screamed and threw myself over the fence, just in time before that person could touch my leg. When I landed in my friend's backyard, my friends also ran in, hearing my screams. My friend's parents also rushed out, their eyes filled with worry. I told what happened, my voice shaking with fear. The mother quickly called the police, while the father, with his decisiveness, quickly grabbed the gun and headed towards the other house. There was no answer when he knocked on the door, and when he discovered the door was unlocked, he walked in, telling us to wait outside. Within a few short minutes, the father returned, holding Dan in his arms. His face was red and full of wounds, as if he had been hit hard by some hard object, maybe a shovel. Dan was knocked down, completely unconscious. There were no other traces on the street, as if his attacker had disappeared into the cold night. That person never returned to that house, and to this day I believe he is still wanted by the police. That night, we learned a terrifying lesson. Even your neighbors, the people you think are safe, can be predators, always lurking, waiting for an opportunity to attack. When the snowstorms pass, the world seems to become quieter and more peaceful, but for those who experience the horror of the long cold night, the memory of what happened will forever linger, left in their minds like scars that never heal. Mysterious footprints in the snow, shadows appearing in the middle of a storm, or strange sounds in the night are all reminders that winter's stillness can hide the scariest things. Sometimes, storms not only bring snow and wind, but also bring unforgettable hauntings.